I'm Thomas, a 52-year-old fella who runs a modest used car lot, one I pieced together from nothing but grit and determination. When I first dove into this business, I was barely scraping by, with just a few grand tucked away from fixing cars at my dad's little shop. My father passed on right after I graduated high school, leaving me a small sum, not much to brag about, but enough to start something. That money wasn't a windfall, but I grabbed it and hustled, pouring my heart into climbing the ladder one step at a time. For years, I burned the candle at both ends, working double shifts and stashing every nickel, slowly turning a dusty patch of land into a legit car dealership. I've never been rolling in dough or living in some glitzy mansion, but that's never been my goal. I'm a plain-spoken guy, and folks in town trust me because I shoot straight, which beats any fancy sports car or skyscraper office in my book. Then there's Claire, my wife for the past 25 years, who's been by my side through thick and thin. I met her way back at a holiday bash a buddy dragged me to, one of those parties I'd rather skip, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. She was there, hanging out with her pals, just kicking off her second year in law school, radiating ambition and smarts, with a kind of beauty that turned heads. From the get-go, I could see she was special, and I later learned she'd been raised by her grandma after losing her parents in a tragic crash when she was just a kid. Her grandmother passed while Claire was in college, leaving her to fend for herself, and I could sense the heavy burden she carried. That night, we hit it off, chatting for hours about our lives, our hardships, and the dreams we held close. Claire had big plans, and honestly, I was floored that a woman like her would give a guy like me a second glance, but something just clicked between us. We dated for a spell, and eventually, she dropped hints she was ready to take things to the next level. I caught the signal, saved up for a ring, and popped the question not long after, my heart pounding like a drum. She said yes, and we started building a life together, not some storybook romance, but a sturdy partnership that felt real. I backed her all the way through law school, picking up extra shifts to cover her tuition and our bills, determined to see her succeed. After she graduated, she snagged a junior role at a small law firm, a foot in the door to bigger things. Over the years, she climbed the ranks while I kept growing my dealership, and together we raised two boys, Caleb and Liam, who are now grown and out carving their own paths. For a quarter century, I figured we had it made, that we'd settled into something solid and dependable. I'm not saying every day was a fireworks show, but I believed we'd built a steady life, grounded in trust and hard work. To me, that's the heart of marriage, a reliable team effort, or at least that's what I thought it was all about. But then, last year, Claire landed a big break, a job offer from a high-end law firm right in the heart of downtown. It was a game-changer, better pay, a swanky title, and a corner office with a view of the whole city from one of those top floors. She was over the moon about it, couldn't stop talking about the opportunity. Her new boss, Blake, was some hotshot lawyer, famous for winning huge cases and soaking up the limelight. He was the kind of guy who loved seeing his name in the headlines and his face splashed across billboards. Claire couldn't quit raving about him, going on about how sharp he was, how motivated, and all the stuff she was picking up from him. At first, I didn't bat an eye, I just thought she looked up to him, and why wouldn't I trust her? We'd been together for over 20 years, more than enough time to believe she'd never give me a reason to question her loyalty. But bit by bit, I started noticing changes, subtle at first, the kind of stuff you might miss if you're not paying close attention. She began dressing fancier, sporting outfits that looked slicker and pricier than her usual style. Sometimes, she'd come home with a faint whiff of cologne that sure wasn't mine, and when I'd ask about her day, she'd shrug it off like it was no big deal. Her hours at work started stretching longer, with more late nights and weekend networking events piling up. I'd catch her texting on her phone, a sly little grin on her face, like she was keeping a secret. Then she started slipping out of the room to take calls, speaking in hushed tones, as if she didn't want me to hear a word. I'm not the kind of guy who leaps to wild theories, and jealousy's never been my thing, but after all these years with Claire, I can spot when something's not right. You don't share over 20 years with someone and miss the little signs that things are shifting. Still, I held my tongue and bided my time, hoping maybe it'd all blow over and get back to normal. I wanted to trust her, to give her some leeway to sort things out. But the longer I kept an eye on her, the clearer it got that something was up, and she wasn't even bothering to cover her tracks anymore. Weeks dragged on, and I hit a wall where I just couldn't turn a blind eye any longer. One evening, Claire rolled in late from yet another work shindig, and I asked her to sit down so we could talk. I kept my cool, looked her in the eye, and asked straight up if there was something going on. I didn't yell or point fingers, I just laid the question out there, plain and simple. At first, she seemed caught off guard, like she was scrambling for words. She tried sidestepping it, tossing out flimsy excuses, but I didn't let up, gently pushing for the truth. After about 30 minutes of going back and forth, she finally caved. She just sat there, staring at me with this casual look, like she'd forgotten to grab bread from the store, not like she'd been unfaithful with another guy. She admitted she was involved with someone else. When I asked who, she didn't hesitate, she dropped his name, Blake, that high and mighty boss of hers, the one she'd been praising to the skies for months. She said it without so much as a blink, cool as you please. The quiet that followed felt like a heavy fog settling over me, but she wasn't finished spilling her guts. She seemed eager to lay it all bare, like she'd been holding it in too long. She said she needed a man who was on her wavelength, someone with big dreams who could keep up with her high standards. In her eyes, I'd been coasting all these years, stuck in a rut while she'd soared to new heights. I was too comfortable, too ordinary, just plodding along, and that wasn't enough for her anymore. She wanted a guy with fire, someone who could take the reins and match her drive. She didn't soften the blow, she even called Blake an alpha, spitting out the word like it was some badge of honor. It sounded practiced, like something Blake probably drilled into her head himself. She kept talking, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, like she was schooling me on something I was too dense to get. Blake was everything I wasn't, she claimed. He dressed like $1,000,000, carried himself like a big deal, and could offer her the kind of upscale life I never could. She threw shade at my lack of concern for looks, giving my workaday clothes a once-over like they were some kind of disgrace. Blake, she went on, was a true man, a guy who got her ambition, who was polished, accomplished, and could provide in ways I couldn't. That, she said, was what she was entitled to. I just sat there, listening, feeling like I'd wandered into some bizarre alternate reality. This woman, my partner for 25 years, was telling me that my loyalty, my steady grind, everything I'd poured into our family and our life together, it was all worthless because I hadn't leveled up to her new standards. I was just a small-time guy with a modest business and a quiet life, and that didn't cut it for the image she wanted now. Then she dropped what she probably thought was the clincher. She had a plan, we could stay hitched for show, she said. She'd keep seeing Blake, and I'd just have to deal with it. She called it an arrangement, like we were hashing out a business deal. Apparently, Blake was all in on this setup. If you can't handle it, she added, her eyes trying to muster some fake pity, Blake's got a whole team of 20 lawyers ready to make sure you lose everything. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like she genuinely cared and just wanted me to be reasonable, letting her chase her shiny new life while I played the part of the clueless husband, tagging along like some chump that I locked eyes with Claire and said, well, best of luck to you. No yelling, no arguing, just those 4 words, calm and final. Then I stood up, walked out of the room, and headed upstairs without looking back. She stayed put, staring after me, probably thrown off because that wasn't the reaction she expected. Maybe she figured I'd plead or put up a fight to keep her, but I wasn't about to beg for the respect she'd already tossed out the window. I'd said my piece, and that was enough. As soon as I left, she got on the phone with Blake. Her voice was quiet, a little unsteady, like she was wrestling to keep her feelings in check. Yeah, Blake, she said, I laid it all out for him. Didn't even try to sugarcoat it, I told him straight up I deserve better, someone like you, a real man. There was a brief silence, then I caught Blake's voice on the other end, faint but oozing that cocky, know-it-all tone. You stuck to our script, didn't you? He asked. Told him he's been lucky to have you this long, that he's not exactly keeping you happy in the ways that matter. Yeah, she answered, her voice catching just a bit, but it wasn't easy, you know. We've been together 25 years. Thomas has been solid, he paid for my law school, handled everything, raised our boys. When she said that, it was like she was hit with a pang of realization about all I'd done, and I could hear a twinge of regret creeping into her words. Blake didn't miss a beat, brushing it off like it was nothing. Regret, Claire. Give me a break. That guy's a nobody, a grease monkey who never even tried to give you the life you're meant for. He's dull, small potatoes. You need a real alpha who can step up and deliver. You're right, she said, but there was still a hint of doubt in her voice, like she wasn't fully sold. I told him all that, but he didn't even flinch, just said, good luck, and walked away. Blake let out a smug chuckle. He'll get used to our little deal soon enough. He's gotta learn his place in this setup. Then he leaned into it, his voice dripping with pride. You told me you're crazy about he trailed off, clearly basking in his own ego. Didn't you say I take you to heights that old man never could? That you've never felt this kind of spark before? I did, she replied, her voice almost a whisper, caught up in the moment. But you know, when I married Thomas, I didn't know what I was missing. He's kind, gentle, not like you. You're bold, in charge, it just pulled me in. Damn right, Blake shot back, all swagger. And I'll keep pulling you in, sweetheart. You've got a whole new world with me now. I'm the one calling the shots, and he's just gotta deal with it. Come morning, I was out the door early for work. No way was I sticking around to hear more of her excuses or deal with those pitying glances she was throwing, like I was some clueless sap who didn't get the memo. She'd made her choice, and if she thought I'd just sit there quietly while she ran off with Blake, she was in for a rude awakening. Around midday, while I was organizing a fresh batch of cars on the lot, Blake strolled into my office like he owned the damn place. He was decked out in one of those ridiculous suits that probably cost more than my house payment, a smug grin plastered across his face as he plopped into the chair across from me without so much as a, may I? He leaned back, crossed his legs like he was some king on a throne, and said, Thomas, it's time we had a man-to-man chat. I could tell right away this was gonna be a doozy. He launched into this big speech, rambling on about his grand plan for the situation, like he was pitching some genius business idea instead of tearing my marriage to shreds. He talked like he was some all-knowing guru, graciously sharing his wisdom with a lesser soul. He went on about how he and Claire had this deep, special connection, how they were equals in a way I could never be, and how he could give her the kind of life I'd never even dreamed of providing. Blake locked eyes with me, a cocky grin curling on his lips, and said, You're a decent fella, Thomas, but guys like me, we're the ones who call the shots. We know how to run the show. He let that hang in the air for a moment, savoring his own words, then leaned closer, adding, You don't strike me as the type to make a scene, but let me break it down for you. Claire's looking for a real alpha, a man who can take the wheel and steer. My blood was simmering, but I kept my mouth shut, my face a blank slate, letting him ramble on. Blake wasn't done, though. He slid a hefty stack of documents across my desk, giving them a smug little pat. Here's the setup, he said, flashing a condescending smirk. Divorce papers, restraining orders, the whole kit and caboodle. Oh, and Claire's already put her signature on them, by the way. He paused, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. The smart move for everyone is you signing these and keeping things friendly, he went on. We don't need any drama, Thomas, and honestly, there's no reason for you to lose your cool. You don't want to be that sad sap who can't face the truth. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping to a hushed, fake pitying tone. Look, he said, dripping with crocodile tears, this way, you can hold on to whatever bits of pride you've still got. Claire's even willing to let you hang around, play the dutiful sidekick on weekends. She's not cutting you loose entirely. So play it smart, Thomas. Don't turn this into a bigger mess than it needs to be. I stayed silent, letting him blabber, giving him just enough quiet to think he was running the table. He ate it up, staring at me with that smug, patronizing grin I bet he'd been practicing since high school. Then, at last, I got to my feet, took a slow, measured step toward him, and before he could even blink, I slammed my fist square into his arrogant face. There was a sharp, satisfying crack as my knuckles met his nose, and he reeled back, pure shock plastered across his face, blood starting to drip down his chin. He grabbed at his nose, stumbling backward, his eyes wide like he couldn't wrap his head around what just hit him. "That," I said, my voice low and icy, "is just the warm-up." He didn't have a second to process before I grabbed his collar and drove an uppercut into his stomach. He crumpled, gasping like a fish out of water, and collapsed to the floor, clutching his gut. Sprawled out, struggling to breathe, he looked up as I crouched down, making damn sure he saw the fire and steel in my eyes. "Let me school you on what a real man looks like," I said, my voice barely louder than a whisper. "A real man doesn't need to strut around to feel big. He doesn't waltz into another guy's life, try to snatch it away, and call himself an alpha. A real man honors his promises, stands by his family, and protects what he's built, something you'd never get, even if it smacked you upside the head. Or maybe you're starting to get it now." I wasn't feeling an ounce of pity for him, his face all twisted up in pain. I stepped back, letting him suck in a few ragged breaths, just long enough to think he was in the clear. "One more thing," I said, planting my boot on his outstretched hand, feeling the crunch of bones under my heel. He let out a raw scream, agony in his voice, trying to yank his hand free, but I held steady. "You think you're gonna limp out of here and call the cops? Be my guest. They might lock me up for a couple years, but when I'm out, we'll have this little chat again, and I'll be a whole lot nastier than I am today." I saw the panic in his eyes, the slow dawning that he wasn't the one holding the cards, that his big talk and fancy suit didn't mean squat here. He was cornered, just some guy who thought his money made him untouchable, never expecting a reckoning from a man he'd written off as beneath him. "Get on your feet," I said, easing back a step, eyeing Blake as he scrambled up, one hand clutching his busted nose, the other cradling his mangled fingers, "and get the hell out of my face." He didn't need a second nudge. He stumbled out the door, bloodied, broken, and thoroughly humbled, not daring to look back even once. I slammed the door shut behind him, feeling the anger that had been boiling inside me for days finally start to cool off. But this mess was far from finished, not by a long stretch. Later that day, Claire got Blake on the phone. "I thought you'd have been back by now. Where are you at?" Her voice was tight, laced with a sharp edge of worry. Blake's response came through, sounding groggy and rough, like he'd been through the ringer. "I'm laid up in the hospital," he said, his words heavy with strain. "Been here for hours. Thomas didn't exactly go easy on me." Claire let out a gasp, like she couldn't wrap her head around it. "What happened? Did you get into some kind of wreck?" "Nope," Blake shot back, his tone sour as vinegar. "I went to have a word with him, one-on-one, like we talked about. He smashed my nose, crushed my right hand, cracked a few ribs, and maybe even my cheekbone." His voice had a faint quiver, like the pain was still fresh. Claire went quiet, her shock so thick you could almost feel it through the line. "I can't believe that. Thomas isn't violent. That's not him at all." "Well, you better believe it," Blake snapped, his patience gone. "I've got the X-rays to back it up." He paused, then let out a hoarse, bitter chuckle that sounded like it hurt. "Your husband's not the soft touch you thought he was." Claire's voice dropped, almost begging. "Can you please not go to the cops? Thomas doesn't belong in jail over this." Blake let out a heavy sigh. "The police already swung by, Claire, but I told him it was a hit and run. He made it crystal clear that if I pressed charges, he'd make me pay 10 times worse when he got out. Honestly, I'm not itching to call his bluff." There was a long pause, and when Claire spoke again, her voice was thick with disbelief. "Not my Thomas. I just can't see it. Blake's tone turned grim, laced with resentment. You didn't see the look in his eyes when he laid into me, Claire. He said this was just the start if I didn't back off. I'm done taking risks with him. She tried to keep her voice steady, but desperation was creeping in. So that's it? After all this, you're just throwing in the towel? The line went silent for a moment, then Blake's voice came back, flat and unyielding. I don't have a choice. I'm doing what it takes to stay in one piece. Claire lingered on the call for a beat, then heard the sharp click as Blake hung up. After that, there was nothing but dead air. Her so-called better option had just collapsed like a house of cards right before her eyes. The next day, Claire showed up at the hospital to see Blake. She looked like she'd been through hell, her hair yanked back in a messy ponytail, dark bags under her eyes like she hadn't slept a wink. She found him in a recovery room, propped up in a hospital bed, his arm in a cast and his face a swollen, bruised mess. Blake glanced up as she walked in, and for a split second, his eyes flashed with something close to annoyance. Blake, she started, her voice wound tight, you've gotta help me out. I was driving around till 8 last night, too scared to head home. I tried calling Thomas to check if it was safe, but he never answered. When I finally worked up the nerve to go back, I couldn't get in, the locks were changed. Blake just stared at her, a flicker of irritation crossing his battered face as she kept going. I crashed at a friend's place last night. This morning, I checked our bank accounts, and they're all drained. My credit cards are useless too. You've got to do something. Can you get one of the divorce lawyers at your firm to start pushing to get Thomas kicked out of the house? For a second, Blake seemed to mull it over, his eyes narrowing like he was weighing his options. Then he shook his head sharply. Nope, he said, his voice flat as a board, I'm not doing any of that. Claire blinked, her jaw dropping like she'd been slapped. What do you mean, you're not helping? He let out a tired sigh, shifting in his hospital bed with a grimace of pain. If I dip into the firm's resources to back you up, it'll just give Thomas another excuse to come for me again. Honestly, I'm washing my hands of this whole mess. He paused, wincing as he adjusted his position. I'll toss you 4 weeks of severance pay, Claire, but that's where I draw the line. Clear out today, and if you run into Thomas, tell him you got canned. That's as far as I'm going. She stared at him, mouth agape, like she couldn't process the words coming out of his mouth. Did you not hear me? Thomas wiped me out, I've got no cash, no job, and you're telling me you're just gonna leave me high and dry. Blake's face was stone cold, not a flicker of remorse. I'm sorry, Claire, but you didn't see the fire in your husband's eyes when he laid me out. He's got more grit than I'll ever have in that department, and frankly, I don't need a disloyal woman stirring up trouble in my life. We're finished here. Claire's face tightened, her eyes narrowing into slits as she glared at him. You're a sad excuse for a man, you know that. Just yesterday, you were strutting around, crowing about being some big-shot alpha. Now you're quaking in your boots, scared my husband, who you admit is 10 times the man you are, is lurking under your hospital bed. She leaned back, her voice dropping to a cutting whisper, dripping with contempt. How could I ever have fooled myself into thinking you were an upgrade? You're out of your mind if you thought I took a spineless coward like you seriously for even a second. Blake's eyes twitched, but he didn't say a word. She spun around and marched out, not giving him so much as a backward glance, leaving him battered, broken, and utterly defeated in every sense. Later that day, Claire was parked on the side of the road, alone in her car, frantically checking her phone. Every credit card she tried was rejected, and she was down to her last few bucks in cash. She knew it wouldn't be long before her gas tank ran dry too. I'd made damn sure she had no lifeline to fall back on, harsh, maybe, but it got the job done. She was headed toward the town where our boys, Caleb and Liam, lived, probably banking on them taking her in. They'd always been quick to reply to her texts, usually buzzing her back within the hour, but now, as she stared at her screen, there was nothing but dead silence. With a heavy sigh, Claire set the phone down and stepped out of the car, smoothing out her skirt with shaky hands. She walked to the roadside and stuck out her thumb, hoping to hitch a ride. A few minutes later, she spotted a familiar, beat-up van rolling toward her. When it pulled over and she saw me behind the wheel, her face froze, a mix of panic and disbelief flashing in her eyes. I got out and pointed to the passenger seat. "We've got some things to hash out," I said, keeping it short and to the point. She hesitated, her feet rooted to the ground, but eventually climbed in, staring at me like I was a complete stranger. She looked drained, like the past few days had worn her down to the bone that I didn't beat around the bush. "Here's how this is gonna go," I started, my voice steady as a rock. "You're filing for divorce, and there won't be a dime of alimony or a single claim on what I've got. Everything I own stays mine, and whatever you've got is yours to keep. Any jewelry I ever gave you, you're handing it back. List any reason you want for the split, I don't give a damn, just as long as you're out of my world for good." I paused, letting my words sink in like a stone in a pond, then kept going. "Once the divorce is done, you're packing up and leaving this town behind without a backward glance. You can reach out to Caleb and Liam if they're open to it, but only when I'm not around and only on their terms. Tomorrow at 10 o'clock sharp, your stuff will be boxed up and ready at the house. Show up on time, or by 11 o'clock, it's all going up in flames. We clear?" Claire nodded, her face pale, staring at me like she'd seen a ghost walk right through her. "How soon will the papers be ready?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It'll take a week, but you've got 5 days to get moving," I shot back. She gave another nod, her eyes glazed, lost somewhere far off in her own head. I took one last look at her, drained and rattled, finally grasping the weight of what she'd tossed away. A faint grin tugged at my lips, and I told her to get out of the van. She climbed out, and I peeled away without so much as a glance in the rearview, leaving her standing alone on the side of the road. The next morning, right around 10:30, she rolled up to grab her things. 5 days later, a stack of divorce papers landed on my desk. The reason she jotted down: irreconcilable differences. I couldn't help but chuckle at that one. A few months down the line, it was all wrapped up, and I was a free man. Do I have any second thoughts? Maybe a touch. I wish Claire could have seen what loyalty really means, that she hadn't decided I was some kind of lesser man, not good enough for her shiny new vision of herself. I bet she never saw the danger in crossing a guy like me, someone who knows what it takes to stand tall and guard what he's built with his own hands. Would I have fought to keep our marriage alive? Possibly, if she hadn't come at me with threats, treating me like a roadblock to her big plans. But she picked her path, and that was the line I couldn't cross back over. I'll keep moving forward, living my life solo, and maybe I'll end up alone one day, but that's a damn sight better than wasting another second with someone who couldn't wrap their head around respect and loyalty.